the Song of Moses in Revelation 15. They sing the Song of Moses and the Lamb. That song echoes the Old Testament. It echoes probably, perhaps, Exodus. It echoes the book of Deuteronomy. And we needed to do some comparative work or some contrasting between these two books, so as not to make the mistake of failing to see that there is a difference in emphasis in the New Testament on some points than there is in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the worldview of Deuteronomy is mostly what you might call a monist worldview, where there is one will. And whose will is it? God's will. In the book of Revelation, it's a divided world, isn't it? It's more, and the entire New Testament is much more explicitly dualist. There is, in using terminology near and dear to this audience, there is a great controversy in the New Testament that is far more explicit than in the Old Testament, and that is pervasive. Now, some books in the Old Testament are much more, lend themselves to a dualist reading, much more than Deuteronomy. I would say, and you might agree, that there are few books in the Old Testament that are as little dualist as the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is quite focused on God's will and God doing it, and God, He is the one who makes good happen, and sometimes He makes bad happen. You know, it's all on His account, as it were. So there is a difference in the worldview, at least to us readers. It seems that way. Maybe He just didn't say it. Maybe the writer of Deuteronomy knew it, but didn't say it. But he didn't say it. So that leaves us, to make this kind of comparisons. The acting subject, then, the main acting subject in Deuteronomy would be God, or mostly God, or sometimes you might even say only God. The acting subject in the book of Revelation is not only God. There is clearly more than one acting subject. There is clearly, again, back to this cosmic conflict theme, one more to factor into the equation of human reality. The reward for obedience in Deuteronomy. If you do this, then what? If you do this, there will be upward mobility. I will bless you. I will prosper you. I will protect you. You will be few, but you will be stronger than the many. You will put them to flight, these kinds of things. If you are obedient in the New Testament, upward mobility. It was given to us not only to believe in Jesus, but also to suffer for Him. That's Paul. And that's the Sermon on the Mount. And that is all over the place in the New Testament. That in some ways you might call it a reward. Paul actually calls it a reward. He says it was given to you not only to believe, but also to suffer. Suggesting that in his paradigm he is seeing suffering not as a downside of believing in Jesus, but actually as an upside, as a positive, as a privilege to share, as it were, in the sufferings of Jesus. And he even says in Colossians that he completes what is still lacking in the sufferings of Jesus. He is completing in his body when he suffers in his body. Have you seen that? It's quite an amazing thought. It doesn't seem to strike the same note, the New Testament, on that point, or would you contest that? I don't want to sound too strident. Maybe the contrast isn't there, but to my reading there seems to be a difference. You will succeed if you obey in Deuteronomy. you might not exactly succeed in the New Testament the same way. The ethos of Deuteronomy. What do you do with the evildoer in Deuteronomy? You destroy the evildoer. Even if it is your son, even if it is your bosom son or your bosom daughter, you do what? You stone them. You participate. You are part of the stoning crowd. That's Deuteronomic. In the ethos of the New Testament is what? Do not resist the evildoer. That's in the Gospels, and in Revelation chapter 13 verses 9 and 10. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. That kind of thing. So there is a paradigm shift. Now you may say there is a situational difference, there is a rhetorical difference, there are other things, and there are seeds. There are seeds of, even in Deuteronomy, as I think we brought out last time, there are seeds there where these things that happen to the evildoer are consequences more than they are punishments. But it's hard. The rhetorical edge of Deuteronomy is considerably sharper and weighted differently than what you see in the New Testament. I think we would have to agree with that. Now the two main points here, though, would be the point of worldview, monist versus dualist, and the point on acting subject, God only and not only God in the apocalyptic or New Testament cosmic conflict paradigm. If you have any comments and want to broaden this, please do. Yes, please. Yes, are these paradigms mutually exclusive? Well, not necessarily, and probably not. But and certainly one would say that even for the Revelation paradigm, the New Testament paradigm, that eventually blessing follows. There will be a blessing in the end. There is a very interesting, very old text on a comment in what is called the Aramaic Targums, on a comment on Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel in the Old Testament, who sort of represent these two, what should we say, sort of types or paradigms. And in the Aramaic Targums, Cain and Abel are talking to each other. It's like a poem. It reads like a poem. It's 4 stanzas. It's just amazing. It's an old text. It's probably an old, it antedates the New Testament, even though it was written down much later, where Cain says that the world is not created with mercies. There is no reward for doing good. There is no sort of, the end game is nihilistic. Why was my sacrifice not accepted and yours was? That there is a complete sort of moral nihilism to Cain's outlook. And Abel will say, no, I know that the world is created with mercy and that there is reward for doing good. That there is a sort of moral order where goodness is the thing to do. And so, it goes back to that. And even for the New Testament, there is no, the New Testament is not nihilistic in terms of, well, in the end, it doesn't matter, you're losing. No, you are losing in this world, but you're not losing in the end. He who endures till the end shall be saved, So there is a perseverance factor in the New Testament, a sort of sticking it out, even though you seem to be the loser. But you do seem to be the loser. And that doesn't seem to be the case in Deuteronomy. The Deuteronomy seems to say that you can cash in this world, that there is upward mobility immediately. So enough said about that. A couple more comments here and then we will move on. Yes? Yeah, you have tolerated the woman Jezebel, yeah, for example, yes. So you have a notion there about removing evil within the church, but hardly stoning them. It's a little less muscular than in the Old Testament, where you actually take them out and you stone your son or you stone your daughter, and that would be hard to do. See, these are rough categories, and again, the main things I wish to emphasize would be the two first ones. I just put those others in there just to get a little more sort of depth of field to our comparison. Okay, now what have we done here? Because that needs to be reviewed before we do the plagues. I was guilty of not doing that, or doing this by way of reminder. We have emphasized here that the acting subject, who is doing what in the book of Revelation, is a very important question. From my point of view, I can't think of any question more important than that, actually. And the usual view, and by usual I mean a view widely held by most commentators. There is some ambiguity on the 7 seals, who is doing what. There is no ambiguity on the 7 trumpets. God is the acting subject in the usual view. There is no ambiguity whatsoever when it comes to the 7 bowls. God is the acting subject. Now in the view, new view, what is that? Well, that's what we're doing here. Now, if we could get traction for that, that this would be known as the new view, we would have done some good, wouldn't we? In the 7 seals, the opposing side is featured in a big way. In the 7 trumpets, we have said, the opposing side is featured in a bigger way and in an even more explicit way. Because we said, I tried to put this a little hyperbolic here by saying, you find the driver's license, you find the passport, you find copious amounts of DNA of the acting subject on these scenes of destruction in the trumpet sequence, and they belong to the opposing side. So, what happens in the bowl sequence? That is the question mark now. And if what I suggest is that there is some logic to saying, well, if God is the acting subject in the bowl sequence, he was probably the acting subject in the previous ones too. And if the opposing side was the acting subject in the previous sequences, it could be tempting to see that it is the demonic that is featured in the bowl sequence as well. But we'll go through it now and then try to reach some clarity on that point. The quest for the kind of action. What kind of action is in view in these sequences? In the usual view, the seals, again, quite ambiguous. There is really not a clear picture of what the usual view thinks about the kind of action in the seal sequence. But it's unambiguous with the trumpets. It's punitive. It's retributive. So it's punishment, it is retribution. Sort of a warm-up exercise for the real thing. And the real thing is in the bowl sequence. The 7 last plagues, where there is big-time retribution. That's the usual view. The so-called new view. 7 seals portray a revealing action. The 7 trumpets portray a revealing action. The 7 bowls portray, well, who knows? We're going to do it now, so we'll see what it shows. Would one of you read again the content of the Song of Moses and the Lamb?
Great and amazing are your deeds, Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the nations. Lord, who will not fear and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your judgments have been revealed.
In terms of where this is happening, whatever you make of these sequences here, seals, trumpets, bowls, however you think they are related to each other, as recapitulations or as sequential or whatever you think. Where are we when this Song of Moses is being sung? We're in time. So sort of where does the choir stand singing the song? Well, I think what we're seeing is there is a sort of an intercalation there, isn't there? We said that last time, that they are probably standing here looking back on the whole thing. So it's a retrospective on the whole thing. Once the whole thing has declared itself, they say this. Now, maybe that is not entirely true. It is mostly true, because in some ways it could be a prospective in the sense that this is what the believers will be thinking, even in this world, that it will be right, that God's ways will be right. But just to play it safe, they're probably standing here, looking at the whole thing and seeing, once it is all over. So this is what they say. Great and amazing are your deeds. Just and true are your ways. Yeah, for you, all nations will come and worship before you, for your judgments have been revealed. So here is my question. What was the problem if this is the solution? If you look at this song as a sort of solution song, or a song commenting on something that was a problem and now the problem has been solved, what was the problem? The great controversy was the problem. Would you want to elaborate more on that? Someone else said something?
Question on the character of God.
Question of the character of God. Okay, great controversy. You want to pinpoint it more? What was it about the character of God that was so problematic?
Were Satan's accusations correct or not?
Okay, so Satan made some accusations against God, and those accusations have now been answered, yes?
I think maybe what it talks about in Revelation 15 is he's saying just and true are your ways, and maybe Satan was saying that he was not just.
So there is the opposite possibility, yes. So if we did it in sort of from the point of view of an accuser, so what would be said? Here it says, great and amazing are your deeds. What does the other side say? Your deeds stink, or something like that. There is a flaw in God's ways, isn't there? Has God really said that you cannot eat of any tree in the garden? Saying that in a way that would really make you think that was, in a more subtle way. Just and true are your ways. What did the other side say? Yes, unjust. Yes, and your name. Who will not fear and glorify your name? What did the other side say about God's name? God's reputation, God's character. You've mentioned it. So, sort of looking at this question from the point of view of 20th century realities, 21st century realities, sort of stepping outside the Bible. Does God have a problem? Does God have a problem? Is there some legitimacy to saying that there is a problem? Does human reality, quite apart from the book of Revelation, say there is a problem? Well, we mentioned here Ivan Karamazov a while ago, and I'll just bring him in again since I'm just doing it with my class on God and human suffering now, and for the medical sophomores, that Ivan Karamazov talks about the suffering of children in the 19th century. And then he tears into his brother, who he just puts him on the defensive. He puts him on the ropes. And then in the end he says, it is not, Ivan says to his brother Alyosha, it is not that I don't accept God, Alyosha. It is the world God has created I don't accept. And so I return my ticket. I hasten to return my ticket. So this could be, that's my sort of bottom line on this is that the book of Revelation is not an esoteric book. It is not a book for the few. It is a book about human reality, as human reality really is constituted. And this question rises from deep within human reality, that there is something wrong with God's ways, that God has not delivered according to expectations. And that's partly an impression from experience, from the world's experience, you might say, and it is also very much the question in the cosmic conflict, beginning very early on there, where the serpent in the Garden of Eden says, there is something terribly wrong in this garden. Has God really said that you cannot eat of any tree in the garden? And somehow gains traction for painting a picture of God, where God is more interested in restriction than in freedom, as we have talked about before. So, something has been revealed here. As you look back on the whole thing, something has been revealed. Your deeds have been revealed. Your ways have been revealed. Your name has been revealed. Your judgments have been revealed, and we think it is good. That's the retrospective. So I put that slide is missing. I just made it 5 minutes ago, just before we started. I wanted to highlight that. But you see how comprehensive it is there. Your deeds, your ways, your name, all in that song, the focus. And a focus on revelation. It needed to be revealed. It wasn't obvious. See? And in fact, if some of you might recall some statements by Ellen G. White on this question, that the universe, human beings, the angels, they would have applauded it if God had done something else. If God had gone in there, let's do a little more flood. If God had gone in there and said, let's do fire again. Flood with Noah, fire with Abraham. Let's do fire and flood again. The angels would have said, Amen. Amen. Just and true are your ways. But God didn't do that. So there is something what needed to be revealed, something needed to manifest itself, and that is what they applauded. It hasn't just been revealed. It has been revealed, and it was persuasive. It was persuasive. They have been won over to see things in a different way and to applaud what God has done along a different way or different logic. Okay, on your handout, I have not today done all the text in Revelation 16, even though I intend for us to go through that now. I have given it on the back page, a comparison between the trumpet sequence and the bowl sequence, as best I could line them up. So you can have that for reference, because I will just highlight a couple of things there so that we don't lose sight of the forest for all the trees there. So let's now read Revelation 15, 5 and 6, and then get to the questions we would like to address today.
After this I looked, and the temple of the tent of witness in heaven was opened, and out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, robed in pure, bright linen, with golden sashes across their chests.
Well, the key, or the sort of giveaway point here that should suggest to us and prove to us beyond shadow of a doubt is that God must be the acting subject here, because the angels are coming from where? They are coming from out of the temple. And out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 last plagues. That settles it. That settles the question of the acting subject. And that has settled the question of the acting subject for some interpreters. Here is my friend Ranko Stefanovic from his his large commentary that Andrews University Press has published, the angels with the plagues come from the very presence of God as his avenging commissioners. It is God who executes his righteous wrath as the answer to the prayers of his people. Where do we find the prayers of his people? We find them in the seal sequence. The saints under the altar, they are saying, how long shall it be, God? How long, sovereign Lord, will it be before you act justly? And the notion of taking punitive action. I actually think that verse is translated wrong. I have translated it differently myself. It is a verse, what the saints are praying for is vindication, but it is often read as though they are asking for to be avenged. Well, anyway, I just wanted to share this one with you, and here is one more from the same interpretive tradition. Probation has closed, and intercession on behalf of sinners no longer exists. The sinners must experience the final wrath of God, which is unmixed with mercy and grace, as the consequence of their persistent resistance and opposition to the gospel. There is a notion of necessity here. They must experience the final wrath of God. And what was it? What is it that has triggered God's final wrath? What is it that necessitates punitive action? Well, they have. That's part of it. There has been a treatment of the saints. That's in the previous statement, I suppose, more so. And what is it here? Well, what did they do wrong, these people who are punished? What did they do wrong? Yes. They opposed God. Yes, they did. And how did their opposition manifest itself? As the consequence of their persistent resistance and opposition to the gospel. Well, what would it have been that would have appeased God? If you had said yes, you would have been fine, but you didn't say yes, you said no. And so what does God do here? I mean, the logic seems to me, maybe I'm over-interpreting my friend's statement here, but I am interpreting him to say that God will punish you actively if you say no.
Where's freedom then?
Well, where is freedom then? Well, that's the what I'm asking you to meditate on is the logic of why, the notion that God is doing this and God is doing this for this reason, and the reason is that they said no, and that warrants punishment. So is is saying no a punishable crime? That's the question.
I thought going to hell was punishment. So what I'm hearing is not only is God going to punish you by sending you to hell, but first he's going to torture you. Because probation's doors have closed, there's no redemption, you can't change your mind, so because judgment is closed, so we're going to torture you, then I'm going to come, and then I'm going to cast you into hell.
My read of this is that here my interpreter friend here is doing the same thing that other interpreters do. Don't think that this is a sort of de novo invention. This is how most people interpret the plagues. That is the tradition. And there seems to be warrant in the text for it, because the angels come out from the very presence of God. What would it be if they are not sort of executing these calamities on the world? And then, to bring another possibility into it may to some extent be a tough sell. I know one or two, I would say two significant non-Seventh-day Adventist interpretations that think that there is a different understanding of this, that do not see this as punitive action, and certainly not as punitive action to punish people for saying no. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that enriches it, and you can say, well, their sin is more than just saying no. Although I do see in this interpretive trajectory, in the trumpet sequence too, a tendency to say that you better not say no, because there is, that in itself would be a punishable offense. There is a slight tendency, but I think what you are saying is helpful. Let me just digress a second. In the brothers Karamazov, there are 4 brothers, 3 blood brothers, 100% brothers, and then 1 half-brother. The father, Karamazov, is a very nasty person. He's just an extremely unpleasant and unlikable and unloving and self-centered person through and through. A very, very degenerative character. And then in the course of this book, he gets murdered. And one of his sons, who has been very mistreated by the father, has actually talked in real life. In one agitated moment, he talked about killing his father. And that was listened to. He actually wrote something about it, that he wanted to kill his father. I'm going to kill you, that. And somebody heard that. And when testimony is presented in court, it is very hard to not believe that Mitya has killed his father. Actually, he came one evening and wanted to kill him. But then, as he was on his way to killing him, he got second thoughts and ran away and didn't kill him. Who killed him? Well, the half-brother killed him, and he killed him. It's very complicated. The whole thing is very complicated. Human reality is very complicated. It takes nuance. The book of Revelation is also complicated in some ways, because the plot line, the storyline, the world plot is complicated. So it's, in some ways I like the brothers Karamazov. It's very complicated, and so is life. Yes. But I will take back the thing that they are punished, because Dave has corrected me there. So let's say there is more to it than just saying no. There is the other side of persecuting. There is the other side of what you have inflicted on the people of God. But regardless, now let's go on and see what we come up with here. These questions we touched on last time. I'll just repeat them very, very briefly. Is a Deuteronomic reading adequate for the storyline in Revelation? Deuteronomy being monist, Revelation being dualist. Are the plagues an expression of God's action? Or could they be an expression of God's absence? Is God the acting subject between the calamities that now come to completion? And there is the notion there of something coming to completion. Please read this verse, and then we will do our comparisons on Revelation 16. So would one of you please read here? Thank you.
Then one of the 4 living creatures gave the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended.
Okay, now here is what I wanted to do then, as in the brief time that we have, to compare the trumpet sequence and the bowl sequence is quite inevitable, because there is what you might call an intratextual relationship there, an intertextual relationship. That's a word that people who study literature love, intertextuality. That's when 2 texts are talking to each other, or somebody writes a new text and they let's do an intertextual reading of what's the title of that poem by Chesterton? Chesterton wrote a poem about a donkey. You read that poem by Chesterton? Well, we need to read more poetry, that's obvious. or there are wonderful intertextual poems. Poetry actually is thoroughly intertextual in the sense that poetry loves allusions, loves metaphors, loves to say something that calls up an image. So I have it in my computer somewhere, but I won't break. Anyone on the poem on Chesterton? There is a donkey talking in this poem. And the donkey is talking about, the donkey is the ugliest of all creatures. It's ugly as can be, with big ears and a horrible sound. And anyway, actually donkeys aren't too bad, because you had a donkey in the old days, didn't you? And we rode on that donkey, and it was quite a nice, a nice animal in Lebanon. But the donkey here is very, very bad, very ugly, this is sort of the lowest of the most despised of all God's creatures. But, says the donkey, there was one day when there was shouts around my ears and palm branches before my feet. That hour short and sweet, there were palms before, there were shouts before in my ears and palms before my feet. What has Chesterton done? He has alluded to what? Well, this is your donkey. This is the donkey that carried Jesus into Jerusalem. Well, the donkey was stupid. He thought it was all about for me. He thought it, but that's intertextuality. That's a text, alluding to another text. But here the text alludes to itself. In the first trumpet, there is hail, fire, and blood fall on the earth. The first bowl falls on the earth. In the second trumpet, a blazing mountain falls into the sea. 1/3 of the sea becomes blood. 1/3 of the sea creatures die. In the second bowl, it's poured on the sea. The seas become blood. Every living thing in them dies. Does it sound like these are parallels? Does it sound like these are in some ways recapitulations? Or at least, intensifying that there's something, these are unfolding along the same lines, but it's getting worse. Trumpets 3 and 4, a blazing star falls on 1/3 of rivers and fountains. The third bowl is poured on rivers and fountains. In the fourth trumpet, 1/3 of the sun, moon, and stars are struck, resulting in darkness. In the fourth bowl, the bowl is poured on the sun, again, resulting in suffering. Bowls and trumpets number 5. In trumpet number 5, the shaft of the bottomless pit is opened, sun and air are darkened with smoke, locusts come up and torture people who are unprotected by the seal of God. In the fifth bowl, it's poured on the throne of the beast, plunging it into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in agony. So there is the notion of suffering. So there is darkness in both and there is suffering in both. The most important of the bowls is number 6. Here is how it compares to the trumpets. The 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates are released. Cavalry numbering 200 million kills 1/3 of humanity. That's the trumpet, 6th trumpet. Now, you think he did this by accident? Do you think the writer of the book of Revelation did this by accident? Oops, it just came up, there is the river Euphrates again in the 6th bowl. Oh no, I wasn't planning that. You think he intended that? Think this parallel is intentional? Could you imagine a bigger footprint of intent than the mention of the river Euphrates in the same, sort of position in the sequence? Those are arguments for reading these along the lines of recapitulation. The bowl is poured on the great river Euphrates. Kings of the world assemble for battle on the great day of God the Almighty in a place called Armageddon. That's the story. And the 7th and last, Loud voices in heaven announce the coming of the kingdom of God in the trumpets. And seventh bowl, a loud voice from the throne announces it is done. Game is over. Sort of end game. So I don't, let's just say that you do your thinking about this and come to your own conclusions on the meaning of these parallels. But the parallels have struck many a reader. They are quite what should I say, quite sort of in your face. And then I would like to do the most important of these bowls, to see if we can gain traction for the view I wish to promote as winsomely and persuasively as I can. Would one of you please read Revelation 16, verse 12?
The sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up in order to prepare the way for the kings from the east.
And I saw 3 foul spirits like frogs coming from the mouth of the dragon, and from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. These are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty.
And another one, read verse 15.
See, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and is clothed, not going about naked and exposed to shame.
And the last one, reading verse 16.
And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon.
Okay. Who is they in verse 16? They assembled them. And I want you to notice something here that is quite important, because the book of Revelation often uses the passive voice. It was given. You have seen that terminology. It was given, it was given, it was, this. It is very often saying things in the passive voice. Here it is saying something in the active voice. Now, what does the use of the passive voice do to the acting subject? See what I'm saying?
At this point, Dr. Tonstad turned to the board and said, let's say we write a sentence in the passive, such as, it was given. The action in this sentence is that something was written. Who is the acting subject? We're not told. We're just told that it was written. What does a sentence in the passive voice do to the acting or active subject? It anonymizes it and provides cover, in a sense, for the acting subject. And the book of Revelation, in some ways, is quite confusing on this point.
Because it has very often a preference for the passive voice. Now, most interpreters use Revelation's Revelation's use of the passive voice to say that this book has such great reverence for God. So it doesn't want to say that God did it. It anonymizes God. They call it the divine passive, that it's using the passive voice to say God was the acting subject. I think that is a big mistake myself, because it's very obvious, very easy to show that it isn't always the case. But here there is there is anonymity to the acting subject. We agree on that. Now here is our text in Revelation 16:16. They assembled them. So who did it? Who is they? Who is they here? They assembled them. You have to go back in your text now. You have to go back in your text and see the whole text. Don't rush to conclusions here. But you have the resources at your disposal to make the call here. In the bold sequence, since we have sort of elevated this to become an important question for the theology of the book of Revelation and for understanding human reality. In the bold sequence, the 7 last plagues, is the demonic side still active? Is the demonic side still an acting subject? Is there a sort of giveaway inside this sequence that sort of that makes a case, or at least, if you want to have God as the acting subject for all the other ones, so be it. But is there still sort of acting subject left to the opposing side? There is a sentence here. For Revelation, quite a break with the way, with its diction, its way of telling it, by putting this sentence in the active voice and identifying clearly the acting subject, and it was who? The acting subject was who? It was the demonic side. It was the opposing side that was still active here till the very end. Conclusions here, and we're going to get through the whole thing today, which I'm very happy for, because we'll start Revelation 17 next time. The bowls recapitulate the trumpets, only they are worse. I think we see the case for recapitulation of some kind is clear there. The identity of the acting subject, this is a sort of difficult sentence, but please try to wrap your mind around it. The identity of the acting subject that is in the foreground in the trumpet cycle carries over into the bowl cycle. To the extent that the opposing side is the acting subject in the trumpet cycle, it seems to me that there is at least a tendency in that direction. There should be a tendency in that direction. Actually, I think you could even say that the foremost objective of the trumpet cycle is to establish or to identify the acting subject, the agency in the trumpet cycle. That is the most important subject there. A third of the sun, a third of the moon, a third of the day, a third of the night, a third of this or a third of that. Those thirds, that's the thumbprint of the demonic side in the trumpet cycle, and I'm suggesting that carries over into the bowl cycle. In the sixth trumpet, Satan is not just barely active. He is not just acted upon. He is acting with all stops pulled. You see that? He's not just there. This is the climax of prophecy. This is the sort of the end game. He is pulling out all the stops and gathering people for this place called Armageddon. We're not going to talk about Armageddon now. We'll do it later. But that, of course, would be, a nice sell. I put this statement from Ellen G. White after our conclusions. I didn't want to put it before our conclusions, because I did not want that to be sort of a linchpin of the conclusion. I was shown that the judgments of God would not come directly out from the Lord upon them, but in this way. Notice interpreters who read the bowl cycles in Revelation, they tend to say, this means that this is coming directly from God. Now, this is quite a remarkable move here in the mind of this writer. I was shown that the judgments of God would not come directly from God upon them, but in this way. They place themselves beyond his protection. He warns, corrects, reproves, and points out the only path of safety. Please, come into the tent, come into whatever, the ark or whatever. Then, if those who have been objects of his special care will follow their own course independent of the Spirit of God, after repeated warnings, if they choose their own way, then he does not commission his angels to prevent Satan's decided attacks upon them. Now, this is a much more complicated construct, as you can see. But I think this is the construct in the book of Revelation, actually. And then the quest for the acting subject will look like this, the opposing side all the way through. And the quest for the kind of action would be a revealing action all the way through. And that is in line with the Song of Moses and the Lamb, because they say, your ways have been revealed. So there is a coherent theology here. It isn't that is sort of, we're not talking about unimportant things. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll do Revelation 17 next time.